From Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford, this is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolfe. Picture this. You wake up one morning, you sit up in your bed, stretch a little bit, rub your eyes open, and you see your roommate pass by your door. And their face, it looks demonic. That was Victor Sharrah's reality, and as you'll hear, it really shook him up, but by the end of that day, Victor discovered he has prosopometamorphopsia, PMO for short. Fewer than 100 people in the world are known to have it. And here's how it works. PMO is a neurological disorder that distorts the way people see faces. For some, like Victor, who you'll meet in a little bit, it hits out of the blue. For others, like our guest Veronica, it's the way they've seen faces their entire lives, but they may not learn that they have this condition until later in life. To better understand all this, I turned to Brad Duchesne. He's a professor in the Department of Psychological and Brain Sciences at Dartmouth College, and he's one of the leading researchers in the world on PMO. He's documented tons of experiences like Victor's and Veronica's. Brad told me about a few notable cases, including this one from a woman he worked with.
There was a photograph that she looked at when she was a kid of the Sioux chief Sitting Bull. And so it's a photo from the 1890s or something like that. She looked at that photo and was very interested in it. And then when she was 8, one day she looked up at her dad's face and she saw Sitting Bull's nose and his forehead superimposed over her dad's face. And she sees both her dad's face and this Sitting Bull nose and forehead. And she's now, I would guess she's 30 or something like that. She's been seeing this ever since she was 8.
On just her dad?
No, she sees that Sitting Bull nose and forehead on other people as well. That's a particularly unusual one. Let me get to a more typical one. A more typical one would be somebody sees eyes and nose that are drooping down. So the shape of the face is distorted, or maybe the color of the skin is distorted. We have one woman we work with, she sometimes sees distortions to the texture of the skin, where the skin will look like potato skins or like tree bark.
And like a guest who we'll meet shortly, Victor, he saw sort of a demonic face.
That's right. So for Victor, features are stretched back and he sees grooves that aren't actually there. So he sees 2 grooves on the forehead, 3 grooves on both cheeks, and a single pretty subtle groove between the chin and the mouth. And there's different sorts of distortions in that Victor's are static. He looks at a face, it's distorted, it doesn't change. If the person moves their face around, the distortions stick with the face, and it looks strange, but it all looks like it could be real. We have other people who see dynamic facial distortions. So they'll see change as they're looking at a face. So the eye will appear to move down the face as they're looking at it.
Do all of the symptoms under the PMO umbrella happen only when seeing people in the flesh as opposed to on TV or in a picture?
For most of the people who we work with, they'll see distortions in person and we'll see them on 2-dimensional representations of faces. So they'll see them when they're watching television. There are some people, they're a pretty small percentage of people with PMO, but they only see them in one medium or another, either in person or on screens. And Victor's one of these unusual cases in that he only sees them in person. He doesn't see them on screens, although we found that there are some color manipulations that we can do that cause him to see distortions on screens. But in typical circumstances, it had been years he'd never seen a distortion on a screen, and yet he saw distortions on every face that he encountered in person.
Now, I know that, and we'll get to this shortly, about how difficult it must be to figure out how many people have this condition. But from the people we do know have it, what do we know about them? Age, gender, part of the world? What can you tell me about that?
For the most part, they're in the US, but we hear from people all over the world. We've seen a very wide range of ages. We've heard from some parents of children who are pretty young, I can't remember, single digits, who are having distortions. There's a 92-year-old woman that we've had some calls with in Chile who sees distortions. Men and women both are coming to us. And if you look in the neurological literature, the great majority of the cases who've had brain scans, you can see brain damage. And it's in regions that we would expect. I mean, it's the occipital and temporal lobes that are most important for face perception. And that's where you tend to see brain damage in these individuals. But most of the people who've been contacting us are not aware of a neurological event that coincided with the onset of their distortions. It could be that the people who are in the neurological literature are people who showed up at neurological clinics because they had some sort of medical event, and then a paper gets published about them. But it might be because we're recruiting people via a website that we're tapping into a different group of people with face distortions who something went wrong, obviously, but it wasn't a stroke or something like that, a major event.
Does it ever just go away on its own?
The good news is it does. Sometimes it resolves sort of as mysteriously as it appeared, and it's not clear why that's happening. But I mean, when I hear from people who tell me I started experiencing these face distortions 2 weeks ago, I don't know why they started. What I'll say is I think there's a good chance they're going to disappear after a while. So
How long is a while?
there are people who have them for decades and they never resolve, but there's certainly a good number of people out there where they do disappear after a while. Presumably, maybe even there's lots of people like this who they don't bother contacting a researcher because they disappear.
When people get in touch with you and your lab tests them, evaluates them, how does that process go?
Yeah, so it's a wonderful time to be a face distortion researcher, sort of in the age of Zoom. We can hop on calls with people and we can present faces to them over Zoom. They can tell us what they're seeing. They can even use the annotate tool in Zoom to mark where they're seeing distortions, and we're able to record the whole call. So that's how everything starts for us. With a lot of our participants, at a certain point, we want to bring them here. There's some tests that we only can run in person. We also typically want to scan them so that we can look at their brain structure and the response in their brain to faces and other sorts of stimuli. But we can do an awful lot remotely with people.
When I think about what a lot of these people go through, when they wake up one morning and all of a sudden faces look different, what terror that must be. Whatever the distortion is, the face is so, as you know, so utterly personal and the mark of a human, and how we communicate and how we relate. To wake up with this condition, to me, I imagine, is just the most scary experience. And for people who don't know about this, which is most people, they, worst case scenario, may feel like they've been possessed or are experiencing a mental health breakdown. Will you talk about what have been some horror stories about people who weren't as lucky as Victor, for example, who found out rather quickly what was going on?
Yeah. We've heard from a lot of people who've isolated themselves when it's happened because, of course, they don't want to look at faces. When they are interacting with people, it's so uncomfortable. They feel like they're better off just staying away from others. And so they're not engaging with friends the way they normally would at a time, of course, when they need those friends more than ever. So it's a really difficult condition to live with, particularly if it's a persisting distortion. Like Victor's, for example, it's every face. We hear from other people who will say, happens to me once a week. So people have told us about, falling into really deep depressions. And yeah, I'm sure there's all sorts of people out there who are unaware of it and are really suffering from it right now.
So let's talk about some treatments. I imagine that it's maybe as unique as the patient, but what have we found that works for some of these people?
We've found that I don't know, maybe it's going to be half the people who we work with. We don't know yet. We need to do some studies with large numbers of people. But a lot of people, their distortions, they're not eliminated in most cases, but they're reduced when they have glasses on. And that's a real surprise to us. We don't know what's going on.
Wait, what kind of glasses?
Eyeglasses. And, we're going to do experiments like just moving the glasses around. Do they have to be in the right spot? One thing that's not really an intervention for PMO, but we see that in some cases, and I think it's going to be a pretty substantial percentage of them, that a factor that drives, or in some cases totally explains their distortions, is the asymmetry between the two halves of the face. So all faces are naturally asymmetric to some degree. But we've found with a number of our participants, if we show them perfectly symmetric faces, for some of these cases, it just shuts off their distortions. We've also run some experiments where we've got a naturally asymmetric face, and then we've got a more symmetric face. So it's not perfectly symmetric, but it's more symmetric. And we see that distortions are reduced. We have people evaluate their distortions, say, on a 0 to 6 scale, with 0 being no distortion, 6 being max. And we see that those ratings come down. And they don't know that they're looking at a more symmetric face because both of them are asymmetric. So that was a little tangent to get to the point that I wonder if what the glasses are doing are providing some symmetry, some perfect symmetry on the faces. And maybe that's helping reduce the distortions. We don't know, but we're going to follow that up with some of our participants. So that's one of the things. Now, that doesn't help Victor. Glasses don't affect his distortions. They're still there. But what does influence Victor's distortions is color. And we've now done thorough testing in 3 individuals. And it's kind of an interesting story. We knew about Victor. I talked with him, and he thought that red exacerbated his distortions and green reduced them. And then there's a man in South Africa who was here 2 months ago now. Same thing, green reduces, red amplifies. So we thought, okay, there's something really interesting going on here with green and red. And we thought that green's going to be the color that reduces distortions. And then one day we were speaking with a woman we've done a lot of testing with. She shows the opposite pattern to Victor and the guy in South Africa. So there's still, I don't think your viewers want me to go in and talk about color theory, but like sort of the 2 main dimensions in color perception are red and green and blue and yellow. So it still looks like this red-green dimension is critical for affecting face distortions, but it's not a simple story where green helps always and red amplifies. But there's something interesting going on. And what Victor's done, as I'm sure he talked with you about, is he's got some green tinted glasses that, if he's going to go into an area with a lot of people, he'll sometimes or often put those on so that he's not surrounded by a bunch of demonic looking people.
I wonder about the degrees that people may be experiencing PMO. Is it always severe? Or if it's not, like it's subtle, maybe people don't even realize they have it. They just think that's how people look. Am I onto anything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So the great majority of the people who we hear from used to have normal perception of faces, and then something changed and they started seeing distortions. We've heard from a number of people now, they appear to have had this their entire lives. So you can imagine if somebody had distortions like Victor's that are static distortions, you grow up looking around at faces, there's no change. You just think that's how faces look. And so I feel pretty confident there are people like that out there who are seeing intense distortions on faces, but they just think that's how faces look.
I imagine that if you could wave a magic wand, besides an enormous grant, you would want more participants in your studies. Am I right? Is that what you would wave your magic wand for?
Yeah, you're right on both counts. I mean, first, I do need that big grant.
Yeah, let me see what I can do.
Because I can't do anything without some money. But yeah, we love hearing from participants. I mean, so we've got a website set up, and there's 3 questions that people answer. And I get an email each time somebody submits responses to those questions. And we're hearing from people maybe every 2 or 3 days right now. And there was a period there when the article about Victor came out where there was a lot of media attention on PMO at the time. And it was fantastic. I mean, we've heard now, since then, we've heard from 80 plus people. And whereas we had heard from only like 70 over 3.5 years before that. So what that said to me is they're out there too. With more media attention, we're going to hear from a lot more people, which is going to be good not only for our research, but also for them to become aware of it, and for others who are around them and who will be more sympathetic to what they're dealing with.
Well, Brad Duchesne, thank you so much for talking with me.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on the show. It's great to raise public awareness of PMO.
When we get back, what was it like when Victor Sharrah woke up one morning thinking he was seeing demons?
I was thinking that I was going to have to go surrender myself into a psych ward because I thought I'd just completely lost my mind.
Then meet Veronica Smith, who's been experiencing PMO since they were 4 years old. How did they see it when they were first growing up?
The features are like placed in a strange way that makes me feel upset. I don't know, you don't really have words for that as a kid.
I'm Kyone Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay with me. This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolf. The way we see faces shapes so much of how we connect with each other. A friendly, symmetrical face? We're drawn to it. A face that looks like it just sucked on a lemon? We probably steer clear of them. And sure, human faces come in all shapes and sizes, but there's one baseline expectation most of us share. We expect other people to look human. But what if one day they didn't? What if every face you saw, your friends, your family, total strangers, they all looked demonic? That's exactly what happened to Victor Sharrah. Overnight, his world transformed into something out of a horror movie. At first, he had no idea why, and only later did he learn he had one of the rarest conditions on the planet, prosopometamorphopsia, or PMO. That's a disorder where faces appear distorted, sometimes grotesquely so. What could have caused it? Was it the lingering result of a concussion that Victor had in 2007? Or maybe it was an exposure to carbon monoxide event he had a few years later? Nobody knows. So I asked Victor to bring me back to that morning in November of 2020 when everything got real weird.
I had just woke up. My roommate walked out of his bedroom and into the bathroom, and I just caught like a side glimpse of him, and it just didn't look right. And a few minutes later, his girlfriend walked out of the bedroom, and her face was distorted. And I looked back at the TV, and everything was normal on the TV. I kind of just shook it off for the moment, and I put the leash on the dog and went out front and took the dog for a walk. And as I was seeing more people outside, I was seeing more and more distorted faces. At this point, I just started to get really scared.
Now, what did you think was happening? And can you describe what the faces looked like?
My first thought was that I woke up in a demon world. The eyes are stretched back, the mouth is stretched back, the ears are stretched and come to a point. There's deep lines in the faces, especially in the cheeks and forehead.
Now, just so we're clear, your dog didn't look different, and what the faces that you saw on the TV screen didn't look different. It was just the human beings you were encountering, yeah, in real life.
Yeah, exactly. And I put up a post about what I'd seen on a bipolar support group website that I'm a member of, and this lady came back to me and she said, I believe I know what's going on, and if you'll give me a minute to explain, I think I can help you. That beat the other option. I was thinking that I was going to have to go surrender myself into a psych ward because I thought I'd just completely lost my mind.
What happened next?
She called me on the telephone and she started explaining to me about prosopometamorphopsia and what she believed caused. The first question she asked me when I answered the phone was, when was your head injury? I had a head injury years before. And she started explaining to me that every time she had seen PMO at that point there had been a head injury or some type of brain trauma involved in the history. And it could be years or months or days, She sent me down to get one of the, like a 1 million color light bulb because her belief was that the distortion was caused by the brain not processing color properly.
I want to get to that in a second. I want to go back to before you knew what this probably was, and you were in that time frame of what the hell is going on. It sounds like you were full of fear.
Panic.
How long would you say that time frame was between the morning you woke up in November of 2020 and started seeing this and getting at least some sort of alternative reason as to why. How long was that?
I was so fortunate. It was under 2 hours between the time I woke up and her phone call.
When you were told this could be a thing, like, oh, it's a super rare condition, and there are some things that you might be able to do about it, who did you tell about this?
Well, I told my roommate. He just thought I was nuts. Told my girlfriend about it, and it scared her.
Was it weird to see your girlfriend who you're attracted to looking like a demon?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
You did not want to make out with her.
Yeah, it does tend to put a damper on things a little bit, you know.
Okay, so going back in the timeline, you know this is a thing, PMO. And Catherine, who got back to you from the online forum, she talked to you about trying this multicolored light. Can you please talk more about that?
She said that fusiform gyrus part of the brain wasn't processing color properly. And it's erasing some of the lines in the face when you look at it. And then the brain tries to recreate those lines, and it causes a distortion because it creates them incorrectly. So our next objective was to figure out if color would impact in one way or another. Anyway, through a lot of trial and error, we discovered that a red light or a red lens would increase my distortions, and a green light or a green lens would alleviate my distortions. And so we got down to, a few basic colors of green, and then that would alleviate my distortions. And she sent me down to the Walmart parking lot with those color swatches she sent, and I would look at people coming in and out of Walmart through these color swatches until I found the one that worked the best for me.
What was it like being in that parking lot at Walmart, watching people come and go with, I imagine, the severity of the demon faces kind of ebbing and flowing? What was that like?
It was really like overwhelming and disconcerting at first. I mean, even for the first while, even though I knew what was going on, it was still really hard to see and to look at it. And because while I can make a picture, showing people what the distortion looks like, well, that's great, but that picture isn't talking to you and gesturing and making facial movements, and so nobody can really grasp exactly what I'm seeing. They can see the distortion, but not how that distortion is moving and.
Can I ask how this affected when you would see, because that's a really good point. It truly is one thing to see drawings, but to see a moving demonic human face on all the people you meet without any corrective lenses, that's gotta mess with your soul, because it's demonic. It's not just strange or uncommon or distorted. It's demonic. Did you feel like fear about people? Like, what in those times, what does that feel like for you?
I look at like Star Trek movies and I think I wonder if Gene Roddenberry had PMO. You look at like the Romulans and the
Oh my gosh.
all these characters. I can't help but wonder if Gene Roddenberry had PMO.
When you're at a party or just getting to know someone for the first time, is this something that you hesitate to bring up? Something you love to bring up? How do you volunteer this information, if at all, to new people?
I don't have any problem talking about it because, number one, that's the only way the word is going to spread. And we're so many people with PMO. We're finding people that are institutionalized and medicated for a psychosis when they don't have a psychosis. They just have a vision distortion. And my goal in all of this is to, number one, create awareness so that it may be less traumatic if somebody experiences PMO for the first time, when it first manifests. And number two, to help people that are being improperly diagnosed and medicated for a psychosis that they don't have, and so the more we can create awareness and get the word out there, the more people we can help.
When you bring up the fact that you have PMO and you explain to people what it is, what kind of reactions do you get?
A lot of people going, whoa, because I have the pictures on my phone that we've created. And so, I show them, this is basically how I see faces, and they're like, oh my God, I couldn't live like that. Or, That's one of the most common responses I get is, oh my God, I couldn't live like that.
If you and I were not 2D right now and we were sitting in a restaurant having this conversation and you were not wearing your glasses, for me to know that you see me in a distorted way would hurt my soul a little bit because I know you're perceiving me in a way that is not accurate. And whenever somebody is perceived as is misunderstood or misjudged, like that's a crappy feeling. So even though I know like this is not a personal thing, it's not a moral thing, it's a brain thing, it's nothing personal. I imagine if you and I were sitting across from each other in person without your green glasses and I knew this about you, I would feel pretty self-conscious and maybe a little uneasy and maybe it would be more difficult for me to connect with you because I know you're seeing me in this way that's distorted.
I can understand that. I have a really close friend up in Washington State that we've been really close online friends for 5 years. We've never seen each other in person. And she's really scared about us seeing each other in person because of me seeing her face distorted. She's afraid it'll change the way I feel about her.
Do you think it would?
No. I know the person.
I wonder, is there anything good about this condition?
The only good part is that I've been able to help other people with this condition. We had a guy in South Africa that his reaction to colors was exactly opposite from mine. Red alleviated his distortions while green intensified it. So it's been very interesting. And we were able to help a person in Netherlands that was institutionalized for a psychosis and medicated. So the excitement of being able to actually reach out and help these people is just really a good thing. And then I spoke to a guy last week who was experienced PMO, and he said his daughter did too. Which now we got to look at the possibility of a genetic thing, like not necessarily you're gonna pass it down, but like a predisposition for it, maybe, or something like that, even, you know. So that was something brand new to us too, right there.
Now, it makes sense for anybody who has especially a super rare condition like PMO to wonder why. Like, why me? Why is this happening? What is the meaning behind all this? When you ponder that, if you ponder that, what comes to mind?
You know, at one point or another, all of them kind of questions have gone through the mind. Why me? Why am I seeing this? And maybe this is what everything really looks like, and everybody else is seeing distortions. You know, there's a million questions you ask yourself. You know, you can't help but. But the more I've learned, the more I've come to understand. And I rarely wear my glasses nowadays, unless I'm going someplace where I know there's going to be large crowds or something like that. You know.
Well, I've asked everything I planned on asking. Is there anything that I missed or you want to make sure you mention before we go, Victor?
I just hope we can reach out to the psychiatric community, especially to help prevent these misdiagnoses and make the psychiatric community aware that this is a possibility in their diagnosis, you know, and to pursue it further before making a diagnosis and prescribing meds, you know, or institutionalizing people, you know.
Well, Victor Sharrah, thank you so much for talking with me.
It's been a pleasure, and hopefully you can be able to help us spread the word.
After the break, Veronica Smith has likely had PMO their whole life, but didn't know it. So how did this condition affect their perceptions, from seeing their own reflection to seeing the face of a romantic partner?
I couldn't even recognize that I was seeing things wrong. I was just like, you're a bad person and you don't love your boyfriend and that's why you think he's weird looking.
I'm Kyone Wolf. This is Audacious. Stay tuned. This is Audacious. I'm Kyone Wolf. My next guest is Veronica Smith. Veronica uses they, them pronouns. For as long as they can remember, other people's faces have always seemed off, and they've never truly known what their own face looks like. Their reflection shifts from day to day, with features that seem to rearrange themselves in drastic and unpredictable ways. I asked Veronica to take me back to their earliest memory of seeing the world and themselves this way.
It's a little bit difficult because I wasn't conceptualizing it as a facial distortion until I was a lot older. It's really only in retrospect that I can understand that that's what it was. But like from a very young age, I spent a lot of time looking in the mirror and being like, this looks really weird. Like, this looks wrong.
What would you see?
It's been hard to describe because I think a lot of people immediately assume that it had something to do with like me thinking that I like didn't look like pretty people I saw on TV and things like that. And I've had a great deal of trouble explaining that like it doesn't have anything to do with that. It was like this feeling of just like the features are like placed in a strange way that makes me feel upset. I don't know, you don't really have words for that as a kid, nor did I have them like growing up either because I didn't really start experiencing distortions that like had a lot of motion to them until fairly recently. And like that helped me be like, oh, I've had this for a long time actually, but usually it sits a little bit more still where I'm actually just seeing like the face wrong, but it's just sort of stuck wrong for a while. And once I got a little bit more severe and I started seeing more like a wiggly motion when I would have distortions, I realized that like that's actually something I've been experiencing for like a really long time.
When you see these distortions, are they only in 3D? Like you're looking at me over Zoom right now. Do I look different?
It kind of depends. It's hard for me to know if I'm doing it to myself because, to be honest, I have a poor understanding of what I look like. Like, I spend so much time thinking that my features are in places that they're not. Like, I'll be like, my eyes are really far apart. Actually, no, my eyes are really close together. My nose is huge. My nose is too small. And like, people are like, no, what are you talking about? Because like, it always looks crazy to me.
Even when you're looking like in the mirror versus looking at yourself in a picture someone took.
Yes, it's sometimes better with a photograph, but not always.
By better, you mean it happens less with a photograph?
Yeah, it's sometimes I think for a long time I like developed a notion that the only way to see myself properly was by seeing photographs of me because they didn't distort as much. But like photographs actually are like a strange way to look at yourself because you're only seeing like one quick angle of your face that doesn't move. So like that also was a weird way to try and understand what my face looked like. I think I've just like grown up having an extremely hard time trying to understand what I look like and like being frustrated that I can't really figure it out.
When you look at pictures, is there any movement in them?
Sometimes it depends on what's going on with me that day.
What do you think makes it more severe?
Being in dark lighting tends to make it worse, especially if it's like greenish lighting. A lot of like horror movies are like in that green filter, and being like stressed and upset and hungry and tired makes it worse for me. It doesn't happen like super often when I'm not in my own home, but the times that it has, it's been like at the end of like an 11-hour shift. Like I work at an animal hospital and those can be really brutal shifts. And sometimes when it's been like a really, really long, stressful day, I'll be like, all right, it's getting wiggly in here. Cool. Like,
Do you see differences in animal faces?
yes, actually, particularly with my cat, I'll like start seeing his face as like really weird looking, and I'll have to ask my partner. I'll be like, "Does he look sad? Does he look sick?" And he'll be like, "No, you're seeing him funny. He looks normal." Because like I can tell when like cats look weird and sick. Like I've been working with animals for a long time, but like if I'm like seeing him in a distorted way, I'm not seeing him properly, and like sometimes he'll just look like wretched and sad, or like his eyes will look really big to me, and I'll be like, does he look insane? He'll be like, no, he looks normal.
It's good to have a partner to sort of double check the reality of things. But
extremely helpful.
right. Speaking of having a partner, I know that for some people, attraction is everything. And for other people, attraction kind of comes with a personality and with growth and with getting to know somebody and them being so sweet and so smart and all that stuff. I wonder to what degree this condition you have has been something you dealt with in terms of being attracted to your partner.
That's a really good question, because I think a big part of me not figuring out that it was a distortion is that when I was in long-term relationships, like the more familiar I get with a face, the more likely I am to like sometimes experience distortions with it, especially if I'm in some kind of mood or like some kind of state. And I noticed this starting really in college, which kind of makes sense because that was like the start of the longest relationship I ever had. There would be times when like my partner at the time, like I would look at him and it would look like his face sort of like got like long and weird looking and kind of rat-like, and like his teeth would look bigger. And I interpreted this as like, oh, you're like projecting all your like secret internalized negative emotions about him onto him, and you actually don't love him, and maybe you should break up with him. I was so in my head about it that like I couldn't even recognize that I was seeing things wrong. I was just like, you're a bad person and you don't love your boyfriend, and that's why you think he's weird looking. I'm like having trouble seeing my partner as attractive because I'm a bad person because I don't love them enough. And yeah, it's been like, again, incredibly helpful to like actually notice what's really happening, because it makes it so much less stressful. Because I used to feel like a huge amount of guilt for having those perceptions because I thought they were like some sort of internalized negative feeling I was like projecting onto the people I care about.
I wonder if there's a part of you that wonders, what else am I not seeing like everybody else is?
Yeah, I wonder that. I ask a lot now, honestly. Like I'll be like, what does that look like to you? I think also that can be stressful now for my partners being like, I wonder if I'm actually attractive or if you're seeing me wrong. Maybe like you don't see correctly and I'm actually ugly. Because, like, you know, when you're a whole bunch of like insecure weirdos all dating each other, that thought's gonna like float up. But it's like, no, I promise. I promise that, like, even though I have a weird neurological condition that nobody has, I'm seeing you and I think you're attractive. Like,
Have you ever done psychedelics?
yes.
What were they?
Mushrooms mostly, and like a couple times LSD, but I didn't really like it.
LSD is intensely visual. I wonder when to the degree to which you're comfortable talking about this, if you experienced while you were on mushrooms or were trying LSD, if you experienced seeing faces any differently, did it just exacerbate the problem, or was it a totally different ballgame, or what?
In some ways, I found it a little bit helpful for looking at myself. I would like look in the mirror and sort of do a thing where I'd be like, okay, good mood. Now I look pretty. Okay, bad mood. Now I look ugly. And I'd be like, okay, it's weird that I can do that. I guess maybe that's just the drugs. But then most people are like, just don't look at yourself in the mirror, bro. Don't ever look at yourself in the mirror, bro. And I'm like, no, it's better to look at yourself in the mirror. It's less scary.
I'm so glad that worked out the way it did for you.
I actually found it like weirdly therapeutic.
Okay, let's talk about diagnosis. There was a before and after of your diagnosis. How did it happen?
Last year, it kept getting worse. And there was like this very particular day where my partner and I had like this like blowout argument. And while we were arguing, I just started seeing his face like moving all over the place and his features just like shifting into like whole different faces. It looked like his hair was getting longer and shorter and turning a different color. And I was like, oh, okay. this is like more than I can just like say that something weird sometimes happens, that like maybe I have some sort of dissociative issue. Like this is like something. And I tried Googling it and just found like the most depressing little Wikipedia page that was like, all of like 18 people have ever been diagnosed with this in the whole world. I'm like, oh, that sucks. Really? I have like the most rare thing that ever happened and there's no one to talk to about it. Then I found Brad's website that's like, hey, email us if you have distortions. Like, just do it. And I was like, hey, I think I have this. You want to talk? And then we did. And I don't know, he was very sweet and very interested. And it was also very validating.
Yeah, tell me more about what it was like once you really understood that, yeah, you have this super rare condition and you're not alone.
It was very clarifying for one thing. Like a lot of things that I like didn't really understand and hadn't really been properly able to express, I was like better able to sort of contextualize it in my own head and then explain it to other people. Anyone who has lived with me has like experienced my despair in trying to get ready on days where I'm like, my face looks insane. My face just looks insane. I can't leave the house. And them being like, that doesn't mean anything. What are you talking about? I can't understand what you mean. So like being able to be like, hey, this thing, they're like, oh wow, okay, wow, yeah, that makes sense for you.
No, you look great. Get out of here.
Yeah, so like that was just like really helpful in terms of like, okay, I can explain a lot of my like utterly deranged behavior.
How do you talk with people about it? Like if you and I met at a party or something, like is it something that you would bring up in conversation about kind of getting to know each other or what?
Probably not. People who know me well know about it, and it's not like I'm humiliated to bring it up, but I also don't consider it to be like a defining thing about me. It's certainly a weird thing about me. um, but if somebody knew it about me and asked, I wouldn't mind at all talking about it and telling them about it. But I think it wouldn't occur to me to be like, hey, new friend, do you want to hear about my brain?
Okay, so you get a diagnosis. Understanding what this is, I imagine, a lot of the battle to try to kind of move forward with your life and understand this. What are other things that make life easier for you with this condition?
Knowing it exists is like honestly the most helpful thing. I mean, sometimes I wear tinted lenses because that helps a little bit.
What color?
Pinkish.
Now, how did you figure out that pinkish was the color that was most helpful to you?
Because I had those anyway for helping with migraines. Because it was like the recommended color for blocking whatever bad light is supposed to trigger your migraines. That doesn't really help if you're not on the good migraine medication. But
So the glasses.
yeah, well, and then the other thing is actually that people's faces sit more still to me if they are wearing glasses. So literally, my partner just has like a pair of non-prescription glasses that he'll just like wear. He'll be like, "Oh, hey there, like young professor boyfriend," and his face will look less weird. And if it's like really bad, it doesn't totally help, but it actually helps like a lot. It makes me sometimes wonder if I've like actually had this since I was an infant because I'm told that I used to cry when approached by people who weren't wearing glasses. I have always insisted on wearing them myself because like again my face looks more crazy to me without them. Like I like have summarily refused contact.
When your parents found out or when you told your parents, how did they react?
So I told my mom about it. My dad has passed away, and I actually asked her, like, hey, do you think you've ever experienced this? Because it made me remember some times that I felt like things she was trying to express sort of fit with that. Like, there was a time she had been watching a performance of like a musical artist we both like, and she was like, I don't know. His face just looked like oatmeal. His face looked like oatmeal and it creeped me out. And I remember being like, Mom, that's nothing. That doesn't make sense. What are you talking about? And That's definitely what was going on with her. And like to anyone's knowledge, it's not like a genetic thing, but yeah, I don't know. I have migraines. She had a traumatic brain injury when she was really young. I don't know.
I wonder if you could have a single day without PMO, what would you want to look at?
Oh, I would mostly want to look at myself. I would really like to know what I look like.
I have a feeling that there are people listening to our conversation who have this experience, who just found this show because they were Googling keywords that we put in the SEO background of our webpage. And they are so excited because now they know about Brad, they know about Victor, they know about you. What would you like to say to them?
I would definitely recommend reaching out to Brad. Like even just having somebody ask questions like, have you ever experienced this? When this happens, what happens to you? And like having researchers like looking at you like, wow, interesting. We love hearing that. That feels good because it's like something that has been really frustrating and like mysterious and causing you a great deal of angst is like suddenly helpful to somebody's research. And that feels great. And not only that, but like it's been documented. There are like patterns that they've seen in other people before. If you have something that like they haven't seen before, that's also interesting and cool. It's like, okay, this is like useful.
Bring your whole self, and we mean your whole self.
Yeah.
And what would you say if you could go back to little infant Veronica who's crying at people who don't have glasses on their heads? I don't know if you could say something to them. What would you say?
I would just want to tell them you're actually not capable of seeing your face properly, and that is why it is so distressing to you. Like, I think if I knew that, I don't know, that just would have been like extremely helpful to me because the extent to which that caused me distress is like way more time than anybody should ever have spent thinking about their own face. And trying to explain it to other people didn't really help me at all because they were always just like, what could you possibly be talking about? And like also sort of gave people the idea that I was like attention seeking or trying to get compliments, which didn't make me feel better because I can't see what they're trying to describe. So like having anybody, including my older self, just being like, you're actually not seeing it right. And that's why you look insane. That's why some days you think your eyes are too close together, and some days you think they're way too far apart, and you keep trying to change your makeup, and that doesn't work. Like,
you're not crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Veronica Smith, thank you so much for talking with me.
You're very, very welcome.
We'll have a link to the PMO lab run by Brad Duchesne at Dartmouth, and you'll see artistic renderings of all sorts of facial distortions. That's at ctpublic.org/audacious. This episode was lovingly produced by Khalil Rahman, Jessica Severin DeMartinez, Meg Fitzgerald, Robin Doyon-Aitken, and Meg Dalton at Connecticut Public Radio in Hartford. If you like this episode, check out the other ones we did where we explore uncommon perceptions of the world, like how a blind person uses echolocation to ride a bike, how life is different when you can smell cancer, and what's it like to suddenly develop a foreign accent. We followed a man who grew up in the American South as he came to grips with suddenly one day sounding like a Brit. And then, as we were in production for his episode, after 13 years with this condition, his southern drawl suddenly came back, and he talked with us about it. You can hear all of these experiences when you subscribe to Audacious on your favorite podcast app. You can stay in touch with me on the socials at Kyone Wolf, and you can always send an email to audacious@ctpublic.org. Thanks for listening.